For about 20 years, I thought I was doing everything right. I was exercising. I was staying active. I genuinely believed that the more I moved, the better off my joints would be. And in a general sense, yes, that's true. Movement matters. But there was one specific thing I was doing over and over that was quietly causing damage I couldn't see and wouldn't feel for years. By the time I understood what was actually happening, I was dealing with joint pain that shouldn't have been there at my age. Stiffness that took too long to work out in the mornings. A kind of low-level ache that I'd started to just accept. Like it was normal, like it was just part of getting older. It wasn't. And that's what this video is about. Because I've since learned that this same mistake, and I mean the exact same pattern, shows up in probably 80% of the active people I talk to over 40. People who are not sedentary, people who care about their health, people who would be shocked to find out that one habit they think is helping them is actually one of the biggest contributors to joint breakdown over time. So I'm going to tell you what it is, why it causes so much damage, and what I do differently now. Let's get into it. The mistake was pushing through pain. Not dramatic, can't walk pain. Not the kind that sends you to a doctor. I'm talking about the low-level stuff. The ache in your knee after a run. The click in your shoulder during a lift. The hip tightness that shows up after a long hike. That kind of discomfort, the kind that fades within a day or two. I treated it as normal, as the price of staying active, as proof that I was working hard. I had this idea, like a lot of people do, that discomfort meant adaptation, that if something was a little sore, it was getting stronger. And for muscles, there's some truth to that. But joints are not muscles. They don't work that way at all. And that's the part I got wrong for a very long time. Here's what's actually going on inside a joint when you push through that kind of pain. Your joints are cushioned by cartilage, a dense, slippery tissue that absorbs shock and keeps bone from grinding on bone. Cartilage doesn't have a blood supply of its own. It gets its nutrients through movement, specifically through the compression and release that happens when you load a joint and then rest it. Load and rest. That cycle is how cartilage feeds itself. When you push through pain and skip the rest part of that cycle, when you keep loading a joint that's already irritated, two things happen. First, the cartilage doesn't get to complete its recovery process. Second, the inflammation that was already present gets compounded. Each workout adds a little more stress on top of unresolved stress from the last one. You're not building resilience, you're accumulating damage. Slowly, invisibly, until one day it's not so invisible anymore. And this is what made it so hard to catch. There's no moment where you cross a line. No single workout that did the damage. It's 20 years of small decisions that each seemed completely reasonable in isolation. That's why so many people don't connect the habit to the outcome, because by the time the pain becomes significant, the cause feels like ancient history. I wish someone had told me earlier that pain during exercise is not a badge of effort. It's a signal, and the body doesn't repeat signals forever. Eventually, it just starts showing you the bill. Here's where it gets interesting. Because the research on this is not what most people expect. There's been a lot of work done comparing joint health across different types of exercisers, sedentary people, recreational movers, and high-volume athletes who train hard and often. And what the data consistently shows is a curve, not a straight line. Moderate, regular movement is genuinely protective for joints. It reduces the risk of osteoarthritis. It keeps cartilage healthy. But once you cross into high-frequency, high-load training without adequate recovery, especially if you're already feeling joint symptoms and pushing through them, the risk of cartilage breakdown rises significantly. The protection disappears. You've gone past the beneficial zone. A study published in the American Journal of Sports Medicine looked specifically at cartilage stress responses in athletes who trained through joint pain versus those who modified activity when symptoms appeared. The group that pushed through showed measurably higher rates of cartilage thinning over the follow-up period. Not catastrophic loss, just consistent progressive thinning that compounded over time, the kind that quietly narrows your options years down the road. And this is the part I want you to really sit with, because cartilage is one of the few tissues in your body that does not regenerate meaningfully once it's gone. Muscle repairs itself, bone remodels, even some tendons and ligaments heal, slowly. But cartilage? Once the damage reaches a certain threshold, you're managing it, not reversing it. The window where you can actually change the trajectory is before that threshold, not after. I'm not saying this to be bleak. I'm saying it because I know what it's like to be on the wrong side of that window, to be in the management phase and wish you'd understood this 10 years earlier. The pain I deal with now is manageable, but it didn't have to be there at all, and for a lot of people watching this, it's still completely preventable. What I didn't understand back then, and this is the core of it, is that joint health isn't built by how hard you push. It's built by how well you recover. Those two things sound similar, but they lead to completely opposite behaviors. One tells you to do more, the other tells you to do smarter. So what does recovering smarter actually look like in practice? The first thing I changed was learning to distinguish between two types of discomfort that I'd been treating as the same thing my whole life. The first is muscle fatigue, the burn, the heaviness, the deep ache that comes from effort. That's normal. That's adaptation. The second is joint pain, sharp, clicking, grinding, or a localized ache that sits right in the joint itself rather than in the surrounding muscle. That one is a signal to stop, not push harder, not walk it off. Stop. Sounds simple. But when you've spent 20 years treating all discomfort as something to push through, retraining that instinct is harder than it sounds. The default is to keep going. What I had to build was a habit of actually pausing and asking, where exactly is this coming from? Is this a muscle or a joint? That question alone changed everything. The second change was building real rest into my routine, not as laziness, but as part of the training itself. And this is where the load and release cycle I mentioned earlier becomes practical. Your cartilage needs unloaded time to draw in nutrients and fluid. For most joints, that means alternating high-load days with low-load or active recovery days. A hard run followed by a walk or a swim the next day. A heavy lower body session followed by upper body or mobility work. The joint gets stimulus, then it gets the space to recover from it. Research out of the University of California, San Francisco, used MRI imaging to track cartilage hydration in runners who took full rest days versus those who trained consecutively without breaks. The rested group showed significantly better cartilage fluid levels, meaning the tissue was actually recovering between sessions. The consecutive training group showed progressive dehydration of the cartilage over the study period, same total training volume. The difference was just whether recovery was built in or skipped. The third thing, and this one surprised me, was paying attention to the surfaces and footwear I was training on. Hard surfaces concentrate impact force directly into the joints with almost no absorption. Concrete, asphalt, hard gym floors. Switching even a portion of training to grass, trails, or softer surfaces meaningfully reduces cumulative joint load over time. It's one of those changes that costs nothing, and most people never think about. Now here's the part that's hardest to hear, especially if you're someone who's been active your whole life and takes pride in that. Some of the activities you love might need to be modified, not abandoned, but modified. High-impact running on hard surfaces 5 days a week when your knees are already talking to you is a different thing than running 3 days a week on softer ground with 2 days of low-impact work in between. The activity doesn't have to go. The pattern might need to change. And I say that having had to make those adjustments myself, it felt like a loss at first. It doesn't anymore. What it actually did was let me keep doing what I love, just without continuing to pay the price I was paying without knowing it. So we've talked about what to stop doing. Now let's talk about what to add, because recovery isn't just the absence of damage. There are things you can actively do that support cartilage health and reduce the inflammation that's driving most of the pain. The first one is collagen. And I want to be clear here because collagen supplements have been marketed so aggressively that a lot of people have either written them off entirely or have unrealistic expectations. The reality sits somewhere in the middle. Collagen is the primary structural protein in cartilage. It's literally what the tissue is made of. And as we age, collagen synthesis slows down significantly. Your body still makes it, just less efficiently, and not always fast enough to keep up with the demands you're putting on your joints. What research has shown, specifically a study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, is that taking hydrolyzed collagen alongside vitamin C about an hour before exercise meaningfully increases collagen synthesis in connective tissue. The vitamin C piece matters because it's a required cofactor in the process. Collagen doesn't get built without it. This isn't a cure, but for someone whose joints are under consistent load, giving the body the raw materials it needs to repair between sessions is about as basic and targeted as it gets. Practical version: a scoop of hydrolyzed collagen powder mixed with something that has vitamin C. Orange juice, a piece of fruit, about an hour before you train. That's it. The second thing is omega-3 fatty acids. We touched on these in the context of inflammation in another video, but for joint health specifically, the evidence is particularly strong. A review in the Annals of the Rheumatic Diseases found that omega-3 supplementation reduced both joint pain and morning stiffness in people with inflammatory joint conditions, with effects comparable to low-dose anti-inflammatory medication without the side effects that come with long-term NSAID use. Fatty fish 2 or 3 times a week, or a quality fish oil supplement. Consistent, not occasional. And then there's the thing that nobody wants to hear, but everybody needs to. Strength training for the muscles surrounding your joints, specifically the stabilizers, the glutes for the hips and knees, the rotator cuff for the shoulder, the deep spinal muscles for the lower back. These muscles act as shock absorbers. When they're weak, the joint takes the load directly. When they're strong, the force gets distributed through the surrounding tissue the way it's supposed to. This is actually where a lot of active people have a blind spot. Because they're fit, they assume they're strong. But cardiovascular fitness and joint-specific stabilizer strength are completely different things. You can run marathons and still have weak glutes that are putting every foot strike directly through your knee. Targeted strength work, not necessarily heavy, just deliberate, changes the load equation for every activity you do. So here's the full picture. Stop pushing through joint pain. Build real recovery into your training, not just rest from exhaustion, but actual structured space between loading days. Support the tissue with collagen and omega-3s. And strengthen the muscles that protect the joints you care about most. None of this is complicated. What it requires is the willingness to stop treating pain as something to overcome and start treating it as information. That shift, just that shift in how you think about it, is honestly most of the battle. I made this mistake for 20 years. You don't have to. Pick one thing from this video, start there, and pay attention to how your joints respond over the next few weeks. That feedback will tell you everything you need to know. If this was useful, subscribe. I cover this kind of thing regularly, and I'll see you in the next one.